300-pound dudes tackling you on a frozen field, the last thing you want to do is stay out there. Believe me, the Rams players were thinking about the jacuzzi at their team hotel, that they find it laughable, but more laughable if they totally disregard the trade whatsoever. This guy has transformed the balance of power in the Eastern Conference. And you could argue the entire defense is going to be absolutely ferocious next year. But if your number one priority is to win a Super Bowl, then J.J. Watt is making a grave mistake. To ride this Chad Henne experiment for an entire game, I might need a whole bottle of Hennessy just to get through that. Guy who's won 8 division titles, who's made 5 AFC championship appearances, who's reached the Super Bowl 3 times and has won 2 Super Bowls for this organization. Aaron Rodgers has only won 1 Super Bowl with Green Bay. Drew Brees has only won 1 Super Bowl with New Orleans. There's only 13 quarterbacks in NFL history that have won multiple Super Bowls, and Big Ben is one of those individuals. Good morning and welcome to Morning Joe right here on J&J Media Network, Facebook Live, Twitter, and on YouTube. I'm Jonah Malkin with you every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Glad you could join me on a Wednesday morning, a jam-packed Wednesday morning. Some big news in boxing. Deron Williams and Frank Gore bouting. I'm going to touch on that. NBC Sports' Ben Cross is joining me just around the corner, and college basketball is back. Going to recap some of the marquee matchups from last night, but we have to start with the NBA, and specifically the little altercation that took place between Nikola Jokic and Markieff Morris. The Nuggets beat the Miami Heat a couple nights ago, 113-96. Markieff Morris, of course, kind of shouldered Nikola Jokic right in the ribs. Jokic responded by giving him a big-time shove in the back. NBA came down and suspended Nikola Jokic for 1 game. They fined Markieff Morris $50,000, and they also fined Jimmy Butler $30,000 for trying to incite additional violence. So just for some context, because let's be clear, Markieff Morris did instigate the contact. He did ask for some type of retaliation, just to be clear. So Nikola Jokic was well within his right to retaliate here. But the interesting thing about this story and the fact that this is a 1-game suspension is the fact that this is just the second time in Nikola Jokic's career that has spanned now 7 seasons that he's been suspended by the NBA. The first and only other incident took place in 2019 between the Nuggets and the Utah Jazz, and Jokic was suspended because he got up off the bench and walked onto the court during an altercation between 2 separate players. So in his 7 years in the NBA, this is really the only time that he has actually been involved in a physical altercation himself that has resulted in serving a suspension. Just the first time. Second time that he's been suspended altogether. And I absolutely despise this. I hate this. I hate this for the NBA. I hate this for Nikola Jokic. I hate this for basketball, because who we are rewarding right now is the instigator. That's who we're rewarding. What we're saying is Markieff Morris ostensibly won. He induced the reaction. He elicited that type of response from Nikola Jokic, and at the end of the day, Jokic is the one that's serving the suspension, not Markieff Morris. So he essentially validated what he set out to do. And who we're rewarding by having Jokic serve this 1-game suspension is the instigator. If the goal was, let's get Nikola Jokic out of the game and suspended, well, they did that. He did that. And I just absolutely hate this, because I don't think the NBA levied a stiff enough fine to deter these types of actions from occurring again. I think if they really want to deter this type of potential situation, they need to levy a stiffer fine on Markieff Morris. Instead of $50,000, maybe you make it $100,000. And that's a much more poignant type of message that you're sending. And that way, moving forward, perhaps players understand, okay, the NBA is starting to crack down on this. They're treating this with much more severity, more punitive types of responses. Okay, we don't want to get involved in this. Because I hate that the reigning MVP is now having to serve the suspension. And again, it's justified by the NBA. I understand that they had to do what they had to do. And to be honest, I actually think that Jokic retaliated appropriately. I love the online spat between his brothers and the Morris brothers. They're each defending their guy. I have no problem with that. I'm all for it. And for Nikola Jokic, I think this is worth receiving the suspension because the rap on him was he's the reigning MVP. But as much as players respect him for his talent, the stigma has been, hey, physicality frustrates and mitigates his skill set. And so that's what we need to do to get under his skin. And so, again, you have this guy who's from Serbia. He's unathletic. He's unflashy. And he's the reigning MVP. So players just think, well, we can kind of bump him around a little bit. When you're a bully, you prey on victims who appear vulnerable or weak to you. The only way to confront a bully is to metaphorically punch them back in the mouth. And that time Nikola Jokic did it. And I think this is one of these instances in which it's totally worth receiving that suspension in an effort to help protect your image and who you are as a basketball player. So I had no problem with that. Here's something that I did have a problem with as we transition to the NFL. So the NFL came down on the Green Bay Packers and Aaron Rodgers. They fined the Green Bay Packers $300,000 yesterday, and they fined Aaron Rodgers and even teammate Allen Lazard roughly $15,000 for violating the NFL's COVID protocols. Now, the $300,000 was a direct fine as it related to breaking the COVID protocols. Apparently, the $15,000 fine were just in response to released videos that showed Aaron Rodgers and Allen Lazard maskless at a Halloween party. So it didn't even have to do with the broken protocols at the Green Bay Packers facilities. Now, let me say this. Aaron Rodgers came, of course, on the reputable, journalistic-backed TV show, the Pat McAfee show, and said that he takes full responsibility for any comments that may have misled people, but he stands by what he said. In fact, he said verbatim, I made some comments that people might have felt were misleading. To anybody who felt misled by those comments, I take full responsibility. Aaron, why are you saying this? Because what you're saying is that it's the people that were misled. Well, who misled these people, Aaron? You. It's not that like maybe the comments were misleading. They were misleading. Aaron Rodgers just flat out lied. And again, at this point, it's not about crucifying the man for not getting vaccinated. I'm not here to discuss that right now. The ramifications are his own doing. It's his personal choice. But to blatantly just lie and have the audacity and the lack of awareness to not just simply apologize and acknowledge, hey, I potentially put lots of lives in danger. I just think it's really selfish. And he's not holding himself accountable in this instance. And the fact that he's trying to walk back these comments half-heartedly, is it an apology? Is it not? I don't really know. It's just you're putting not only yourself in potential harm, you're putting your teammates in harm's way as well. And to be honest, it's just very upsetting and it's very disappointing to have Aaron not fully double down, but not exactly apologize either. And apparently the Packers were made aware that future violations could result in an escalated form of discipline, a possible change of draft position, or loss of draft choices. And to be honest, I'm actually extremely disappointed and upset with the NFL as well. I don't think they levied a stiff enough fine. It's really just a slap in the wrist. And this was about the bare minimum that they could do to punish the Green Bay Packers. I don't think it was punitive enough. I don't think it was harsh enough. I understand that Roger Goodell has his constituents and the owners that he has to appease. But at the end of the day, it was made pretty clear prior to the start of the season, hey, if you break protocol, here is what's going to happen. And instead, he's almost rewarding the team a third chance. A $300,000 fine for an NFL team is nothing. It should have been a much stricter fine. He should have fined them about $1 million. And then after that, okay, maybe we start to take away some draft compensation, some other assets to further deter you from doing these types of actions again. I mean, what they allowed Aaron Rodgers to get away with was just abhorrent. It was selfish. It was self-serving. Had total disregard for others within their own organization, mind you. And it should have been addressed with more severity, in my opinion. I really feel strongly about it. I understand why the NFL didn't want to suspend Aaron Rodgers an additional game. He ostensibly served that suspension by missing the game against the Kansas City Chiefs, so I understand that perspective. But, while he was recovering for COVID, but I just don't think that – I thought the $300,000 fine was shameful, and I thought even Aaron Rodgers should have been fined a little bit more directly. I understand he claimed to be allergic to one of the ingredients in the mRNA of the vaccination, but still, I just don't really like the precedent that it set. I really didn't. So I want to transition. This is an interesting story, and in 10 minutes, Ben Cross, NBC Sports Ben Cross, is joining me on the show. So this was an interesting headline, one that I don't see too often, but it's becoming much more prevalent now. The boxing world gained two new eclectic fighters, Deron Williams, the former NBA star, and Frank Gore, the former NFL star, though technically he hasn't officially retired in the NFL. He's actually fielded interest from teams in the NFL, but he's bypassed those opportunities to focus on boxing. Those two gentlemen are actually going to be fighting on the undercard of the Jake Paul-Tommy Fury fight. So talk about headlines that you didn't expect to wake up and see yesterday. That's the one that I saw that had me shook and taken aback fully. So these are the two latest athletes to foray into the combat sports arena. Deron Williams, 37 years old, 6'3", a wingspan of 6'6". This is a three-time All-Star, retired from the NBA after the 2016-2017 season. And the interesting thing about him is he's coached by Saif Saud, and who's actually a pretty reputable MMA trainer and a former judo fighter. Had a 3-0 MMA record, so he's in good hands. Who's the owner of the Fortis Gym Academy, which is where Deron Williams is actually is a part owner in the gym as well. And Sood actually trains Uriah Hall, Lonzo Menafield, and Geoff Neal. So he's got some reputable clients that are helping him out. But again, so you have Deron Williams juxtapose Frank Gore, who's 38 years old, who's 5'9". He's built like a tank. Don't get me wrong. He's built like a tank. The 5-time Pro Bowler, 16 years in the NFL. And his manager is actually a longtime fight rep, Malky Kawa of the First Round Management. Also reps other NFL players. He has repped John Jones before. He's repped Anthony Pettis, Jorge Masvidal, BJ Penn. So he's got some guys at his disposal as well. And, of course, this is going to be for the December 18th a fight at Amalie Arena in Tampa, Florida. Again, part of the undercard between Jake Paul and Tommy Fury. So the fight's taking place at 215 pounds, and it's 4 3-minute rounds. Now, the last time we saw truly NBA guys enter the combat sports arena, we saw Nate Robinson get absolutely obliterated by Jake Paul. We saw Lamar Odom fight Aaron Carter, the rapper. Surprisingly, that fight actually was bought. And now apparently Kendall Gill, former NBA player, really good NBA player, is trying to venture into pro fighting sports. And the only thing I'll say before I dive into this is I guess both of these guys are claiming that they've got some background experience. Frank Gore has been training both for football and for boxing the past several off seasons. And Deron Williams is a former 2-time state wrestling champ at 67 pounds and 112 pounds back in his day. Really big into wrestling. So that's what has kind of added to this passion apparently for fighting. He's got some background. Again, wrestling is very different from boxing, but he has sparred with UFC fighter Ryan Spann, who trains at his gym. But this is the thing that I wanted to say. We're living in an age where people are consuming entertainment boxing. It's not about the quality of the boxing. It's about the entertainment value that it has. And so for a lot of kind of boxing purists and boxing traditionalists, this form of entertainment boxing is really kind of diluting the actual arena of combat sports, because what you're throwing in is guys with huge followings, guys with clout versus guys that are truly talented at the sport trying to ascend in the sport. Now, I don't have any issues with that necessarily. I think that what Jake Paul and the Ball brothers have shown is that they've really mastered the ways in which you can monetize off of your huge following. Whether you're a YouTuber, whether you're an entertainer, for any of these quote unquote interlopers that are trying to enter into the combat sports field, to their credit, they've kind of created the blueprint for how to still monetize off your name and circumvent traditional promoters to give yourself opportunities to execute fights. And in fairness, they've also generated a lot more revenue for lesser known fighters that they've brought along on the undercard to split a greater share of the revenue with. So they in fairness, they've done a lot of really great things. But again, for combat sport purists, what's the message that we're sending here? And the question that I have is pretty simple. I just don't know what the true motivation is. I understand that both of these guys allegedly claim to have this burning passion and desire to engage in combat sports. But this just seems, but I don't know if this is an attempt to regain some type of relevancy or if it's a financial thing. Deron Williams has made over $157 million in earnings in his career. Frank Gore has made over $62 million of earnings in his career. So I don't want to believe that it's financially motivated, but is it to regain relevancy? Is it truly to try your hand at professional fighting? I don't know. And the other baffling thing is why these two guys? One of the things that makes combat sports so entertaining and so captivating are the narratives, are the storylines. Do these guys have true disdain for one another? I have no idea. Deron Williams is from Dallas. Frank Gore is from Miami, Florida. I guess Texas and Florida have some kind of beef with one another. I don't know. Why these two guys? It seems so random. It seems so arbitrary. I just don't understand. Do they have a history? Where did these two guys come out from? That's the question that I have. Well, I mean, why these two individuals? Do they have some type of animus and bad blood between one another? Those are the questions that I want to know. Now, I do think it will generate some more eyeballs on the fight, but I like understanding why these two guys are going after one another. And right now, I just don't really know why. But again, when I saw that headline, I said, well, here we go. This is the age that we're living in. This is the age that we're living in. Okay, finally, one quick topic, final topic, and then I'm bringing on my guest, Ben Cross. So just really quickly want to touch on this little little storyline. College basketball is back. They've returned from a 7-month hiatus from the national championship game between Baylor and Gonzaga last year. Some great opening day matchups. We saw Chet Holmgren, the number 1 overall prospect, play for Gonzaga. UCLA ranked number 2, looking great, just like they did at the end of last season. Amani Bates, the freshman out of Memphis, looks like he might be the second coming of Jason Tatum at 6'9", has tremendous size and athleticism. There were a lot of great matchups yesterday. The State Farm Champions Classic, of course, headlining that. We saw Kansas knock off Michigan State. Bill Self, once again, turning over another tremendous player in Ochai Agbaji. The senior dropped 29 points. So we had that. And then we also had Duke and Kentucky, all 4 of these teams being part of this tournament for the 11th consecutive year. And number 9 Duke beat number 10 Kentucky. I don't really care about the rankings, but I did want to touch on what this game meant, because to me, this game was really significant from an historical perspective when it comes to Mike Krzyzewski as he's opening up his farewell season. Duke beat Kentucky 79-71. So, first of all, it's played at Madison Square Garden. The Blue Devils shot like 8% from 3, 1 for 13 from 3. Yet they managed to win the game, which is kind of unfathomable in today's era of basketball. But what was fascinating was how they won the game. They were led by 2 sensational freshmen. And Mike Krzyzewski, again, has some more incredible freshmen on his roster. Paolo Banchero and Trevor Keels. Banchero dropped 22 points, is projected to be a top 3 pick in the NBA draft. Keels is a 5-star recruit in his own right, really special player. But as we've commenced the final chapter of Coach K's career, this game and this matchup, to me, kind of further emphasized the sustained greatness of Mike Krzyzewski. Because the thing about Krzyzewski is he's 74 years old, 42nd season at the helm at Duke, is 2 things have happened in his span as a head coach. The style of basketball has evolved, and the recruiting tactics have changed. And he's been the best coach at being adaptable, at evolving from previous eras to now. Because when he started off his career, whether you want to stick with the Christian Laettner, Grant Hill years, whether you want to go to the Jason Williams, the Dante Jones, and the Carlos Boozer days, whether you want to go to the Plumlee brothers and the Seth Curry years, whether you want to go to the Jahlil Okafor, Grayson Allen transition to now most recently Zion and RJ Barrett, he's had to evolve as a coach. He's had to evolve his recruiting methods. At the time, during Christian Laettner and these younger generations, it wasn't about one-and-done players. It was about developing teams, bringing guys back for their junior, for their senior years, and then going in to the big dance to try and win it all. And what's happened is kind of the rug got pulled out from underneath him, yet he still managed to hold on and is now, riding like Aladdin on this magic carpet. He's been able to still find a way to adapt with the times. And if initially it was a big centric type of approach to athletic wings, to shooters, he's managed to build teams every single year that have stayed competitive. And that's a credit to his success. And I think that when you think about how the game has evolved and how he's had to contend with John Calipari, who's essentially mastered the recruiting process, he's perhaps the best recruiter in college basketball. He was the first to really recognize, hey, the nature of the one-and-done players and how what he's going to do, his tactic is to go to people's homes and talk to the top prospects in front of their families and say, listen, you want to make it to the NBA, you play one season with me, I'm going to get you there. And that strategy, though it only resulted in one national title with Anthony Davis leading the way, he's consistently just had a carousel of elite 5-star athletes on his team every single year. And finally, Mike Krzyzewski kind of got up to speed with that. And that's why it was only fitting to me that yesterday the storyline was in Krzyzewski's final season, his two freshmen knocked off Kentucky, a team filled of veterans and transfers. And that's why, to me, yesterday was so significant, not because of necessarily the two teams or their rankings, but because of the two coaches and what this most recent game represented. I mean, to me, I think he's rivaled Nick Saban when it comes to the best college coaches. We've seen Nick Saban be able to adapt, winning 7 national titles, starting off as a defensive-minded coach, then an emphasis on defense plus the run game. Now it's all offensive-minded. That's what Nick Saban finally realized was, hey, I need to start recruiting skilled positions, wide receivers, quarterbacks. That's where the game is going. He recognized that. He made the adjustment. Mike Krzyzewski's made a similar pivot. And I just think it highlights just how far Coach K has come in his career, the type of team that he has now. And his opponent in Kentucky, the coach was kind of known for being able to recruit those types of kids. So it was only fitting in that regard. Okay. Now it is my pleasure to bring on a friend, a guest of the show. NBC Sports' Ben Cross. Ben Cross kind of helps curate and distribute a bunch of sports across the platform. Make sure to check all that stuff out. And as I bring Ben Cross onto the show, good morning, Ben. How are you?
Morning, Jonah. Thanks for having me on. It's been a while.
It has been a while. I know that I promised to bring you on, or I was hoping to bring you on, had Wisconsin beaten Notre Dame in college football. Obviously, I didn't bring you on then because we looked absolutely atrocious, so I didn't have the self-respect to bring you on. Perhaps now we're starting to earn a little bit of respect. This is probably more reflective of where we are as a team. I'll ask you about that towards the end, but let's stick with college football though. And the most recent college football rankings. I know both of us are well attuned. We follow this type of stuff. So college football playoff committee came out yesterday. They revealed their top 4. Georgia 1, Alabama 2, Oregon 3, Ohio State 4, Cincinnati right on the outside looking in at 5, Michigan 6, Michigan State 7, and Oklahoma 8. I'll cap it off right there. So let me first ask you, did you have any problems with last night's rankings?
I think the big question with last night's rankings was where was Michigan State going to be in comparison to Michigan? Given their first rankings, that's what everyone was looking at. Obviously, Michigan State with the big upset loss on the road against Purdue, who just seems to be knocking off any top 5 team that comes to town. But that was going to be the real question. The committee ultimately put them at 7, behind Michigan at 6, despite the fact that they had the head-to-head. The committee has flip-flopped a little bit on this. You see it with Oregon and Ohio State. Any head-to-head matchups, they gave Oregon the nod in that Oregon beat Ohio State on the road. And, Ohio State ultimately, lost to a better team than Stanford, who Oregon lost to. So you were wondering whether they were going to honor that head-to-head style approach, and they really didn't with Michigan State. Ultimately, Michigan State now losing to a ranked Purdue team, but regardless, Michigan's only loss coming on the road against a tough Michigan State team. So it's going to be interesting to see how they deal with those teams, but one of the nice things about these committee rankings and a lot of the teams in contention right now is a lot of it's going to be figured out. A lot of these teams are going to have to lose. Bama is going to have to lose at some point unless they win out, at which point both them and Georgia would be a lock for the playoffs. Cincinnati ultimately probably won't lose given their remaining schedule. Oregon could lose. Ohio State, Michigan State, and Michigan are all going to have some games among each other. So a lot of this is going to be figured out. But if you looked at last night specifically, the question was Michigan State, how are they going to handle that? And I think a lot of people expected Michigan State to be ahead of Michigan, given how the committee handled Oregon and Ohio State, but they reversed that and said Purdue is too bad of a loss to compare to Michigan's only loss. The head-to-head didn't matter as much in that case.
So you mentioned Cincinnati, how they're likely going to win out. So obviously when the first rankings were released, they came in at number 6. Now they're at number 5. Do you put much stock into their position at number 5? Because to me, I think that assuming Michigan were to lose to Ohio State, they're probably done. If Michigan State were to beat Ohio State, I don't really see a situation in which the committee says, yeah, you know what, we're going to put Cincinnati in number 4 over a Michigan State team. So to me, I almost think that Cincinnati, while they're in the best position that any non-Power 5 school has ever been in at this point of the season, to me, it almost seems like they're just paying a little lip service, like they're just reluctantly giving them some respect. But how much stock do you really put into them being at number 5?
Not a ton. I mean, you mentioned everything that they're up against. I think the only situation in which the committee would have given Cincinnati the benefit of the doubt is if last week they put them at 2 or 3. But the fact that they put them at 6 basically meant that Cincinnati needs all these other teams to lose in order for them to even have a chance. I mean, if you're looking at what's in Cincinnati's way, they need to be a big Ohio State fan and a big Georgia fan. That would eliminate Bama. It would eliminate Michigan. It would eliminate Michigan State. And then they need to be a big Baylor fan this weekend as they play Oklahoma at home. If Oklahoma stumbles at any point, Oklahoma surprisingly wasn't given much credit by the committee. I guess I shouldn't say surprisingly if you've actually watched Oklahoma, but from years past, they tend to give them the benefit of the doubt. If Oklahoma stumbles anywhere, the Big 12 is out of the race. And then if Oregon stumbles at any place, they're out of the race. And then Cincinnati might have a legitimate shot, but they need almost all of those pawns to fall in this scenario in order for them to really be in contention. Them being at 6 last week was the main statement. As you mentioned, the committee begrudgingly put them up to 5, and that was really only because Michigan State lost and they were moving everyone else up. Cincinnati is really up and against it, and there's not really much they can do as far as style points the rest of the way here. I think maybe the last week, if they really put on a show against Houston or whoever they have to play, that'll look slightly more impressive. But at the end of the day, the committee's made up their mind on Cincinnati. It's really not up to them. It's up to what happens to the rest of these teams.
The interesting thing, too, is whether or not Cincinnati and maybe another non-Power 5 school that is ranked try and schedule some type of game like they did last year. I forget if it was between BYU. Who was it between? BYU and like East Carolina?
Coastal Carolina.
Coastal Carolina. So I don't know if that's what they're going to do, but it'd be interesting to me because, again, you talk about style points. Cincinnati didn't even look that good against Tulsa, but they won the game. Okay, so let me shift to the NFL, and specifically Aaron Rodgers trying to kind of walk back these comments on the Pat McAfee show about being immunized and trying to allay some of perhaps the uproar that he incited to a certain degree over this. What do you make of this whole situation, and what do you make of how the NFL responded to these actions by Aaron Rodgers and the Packers?
Well, whatever you make of the situation, in a week or two, it'll pretty much all be smoothed over. I understand that people's public perception of Aaron Rodgers will change and has changed, but the public didn't necessarily love Aaron Rodgers to begin with. And if you look at the NFL's response, which was really what the question was going to be, they gave him a slap on the wrist. They fined the Packers $300,000, but they only fined him, I think, 10, 15,000, whatever it turned out to be. In fact, they fined CeeDee Lamb more money this week for playing with an untucked jersey. That was a repeat offense, so the fine was going up. But I think it shows what the NFL was choosing to do in response to this Rodgers thing, and that's pretty much just give him a slap on the wrist with COVID. And he's not the only player that hasn't gotten vaccinated. There certainly have been other players that are under that microscope. Kirk Cousins is one positive COVID case away from being under this microscope as well. I think it was the fact that Rodgers said he was immunized has really enraged much of the media, and I think probably brought more of a scope down on him. But ultimately, I don't agree with his decision in any way, his decision to describe it that way, his decision to treat it the way he did. But at the end of the day, the NFL has made their statement clear. He's not really going to be punished. He'll probably be back on the field, if not this week, then certainly next week. And I think the Packers are in a great position. The division is running away from them in the opposite way. they're going to be fine. They're going to the playoffs. They'll have several home games. I think the question is going to be whether they'll be the 1 or the 2 seed. Regardless, it's not really going to affect the outcome this season, and I don't think it'll affect Aaron Rodgers all that much going forward. I think in a week or two, most of it will blow over with the fact that there's really no repercussions moving forward.
So let's look at the conferences as a whole. Something that I've repeatedly said is the AFC is the overall better and deeper conference right now. But at the same time, I think that more of the legitimate Super Bowl contenders are going to come out of the NFC than the AFC. You look at the AFC, it's wide open. One week you think the Bills are the best team, then they lose to the Jaguars. The Titans, while they look like the best team, even though they had an impressive win over the Rams without Derrick Henry, the Bills were perhaps 4th and 1 yard from winning that game, which I still think that the Bills are probably the better team. But to the Titans' credit, Derrick Henry went off for like 140 yards. They won that game. But then you have teams like the Chargers and the Browns and the Bengals and the Ravens. And what do you make of Kansas City? Are they going to be able to turn it around? So I don't really know what to make of the AFC. I know who the Super Bowl contenders are from the NFC. Who do you think in your mind is the best team in the AFC at this very moment?
You want to say the Ravens, you do. They have a ton of talent. Their offense is incredible. They're well coached. Their defense is playing a lot better this year. You want to say them, but the Ravens have let a lot of people down in the last few years under Lamar Jackson in big moments. They seem like they're a phenomenal regular season team, and then as soon as they get to the playoffs, they meet up with some really good defensive squad that's able to figure them out, which I'm not saying is an easy thing to do, but eventually when you get deep into the playoffs, you're going to play teams like that. And if you're not playing in Baltimore, it can be tough to sometimes overcome those hurdles. And the Ravens don't really seem like a team that can do that. I think they are the best team right now in the AFC, but I think it's tough to project that they're going to do what they haven't done in years past and remain perfect in the playoffs. So I think right now I would say the Ravens. The Titans are an interesting team because they continue to defy some odds. I think them walloping the Rams was a big surprise to a lot of people, especially without Derrick Henry. I think they have a much more solid offense than people want to give them credit for. And their defense is great, but they're winning some close ones along the way. I think ultimately the Titans are going to have a little bit of a regression towards the end of the year, but right now they're playing phenomenal football and they absolutely have to be in contention for the best team in the AFC. I think they're going to win their division, no problem. I don't think the Colts have the steam to catch up with them at this point. Looking elsewhere around the AFC, I think the Bills are a huge shocker to people. They've had expectations in years past, but they really, really were expected to be a good team this year. And suddenly now they're only half full game ahead of the Patriots in that division. And the Patriots very well might catch up with them soon. And they're looking like one of the hottest teams in the NFL right now. The Bengals looked like a very hot team, a very popular pick. They've slowed down. I think their offense is a little inconsistent. So you mentioned, the AFC is all over the place. Now, to your point about the Chiefs, I don't necessarily see them progressing to the point where they were in years past. I think they could be a fringe playoff team. I could see them catching one of the wild card spots, but I don't think they're that dangerous. I think their offense has kind of lost their identity. They're continuing to try and do all the cute little trick plays that worked when they were up by 20 or 30, but they're not doing the small things to get the game into hand, even when they're playing teams like the Giants, which you really need to do. You have to start with the fundamentals before you're able to get to those points and confuse teams offensively. So I think the AFC is really up for grabs. I would like to say it's the Ravens conference to lose right now, but the Titans are right there. The Patriots are on the come up. The Bills are solid. It's really hard to pick one exact winner, but I will say it is pretty stacked as far as playoff teams. I agree with you that they have a deeper playoff field. I don't think they have necessarily the contenders that the NFC does at the top, but I think they're a deeper playoff field.
Listen, I would love if Lamar Jackson won a Super Bowl. He's just an electrifying player, just a great player to root for. And by the way, I actually did, if people were to check my records, I did say that the New England Patriots were going to be a surprise team this year, that they would make the playoffs. How? I don't know why. Them and the Pittsburgh Steelers were the other team that I said would make the playoffs. I don't know if it's going to hold up. We'll see. But to me, just the Chiefs are so interesting because, Ben, to me, for a bunch of the other teams that we've talked about, the Titans, the Bills, of those teams have had some inexplicably bad losses, like to bad teams. Titans lost to the Jets. Bills just lost to the Jaguars. I found myself taking a step back when I was looking at the Chiefs and saying, okay, they're 5-4. Of course, they haven't lived up to the expectations that we've set out for them. Mahomes hasn't played as well as we would have hoped this year. But when you look at all their losses, they're all to playoff teams, or at least to fringe playoff teams. They haven't. I'll put it this way: have they looked pretty in every win? Absolutely not. The Giants game was just an ugly win. They only had one good half against the Washington football team, but they lost to the Chargers on a bad interception from Mahomes. That's a team that we think is a fringe playoff team. Lost to the Ravens, a game they should have won if Clyde Edwards-Helaire doesn't fumble it. They got blown out by the Bills. Okay, but the Bills were viewed as perhaps the best team in the AFC. And then they lost to the Titans, who right now are 7-1. So to me, I'm just looking like I understand we would have expected the Chiefs to be better, but at least they haven't lost to the teams that they're supposed to beat, in my opinion.
I think that's very fair. I think that also poses an issue, though, in that they've been very consistent. They'll beat bad teams this year. They might even sneak into the playoffs, but the issue is they've shown they consistently can't beat top
right.
teams.
Can they beat? Right.
You mentioned they've played a lot of those teams close, and I'm not saying it's impossible, but they're probably not going to have any home field advantage if they do get to the playoffs, and I think that's a big factor for them. At the end of the day, I think we know what the Chiefs are. I think every week everyone was saying, okay, this is the week the Chiefs are going to look like their old selves. I don't think they're going to reach that level. I think they're consistent. They'll beat bad teams, but I don't necessarily know if they can hang with the contenders.
So let me quickly get your thoughts on this one NBA topic. So the whole Ben Simmons situation, a position that I've held is this. I always believed the earlier you could have gotten rid of him, the better. You don't want to keep a distressed asset in your building who's just going to have a deleterious effect on your team the longer that he stays. And the whole situation has just been a huge rigmarole. You tell him that the only way he's going to get his money is if he shows up begrudgingly, doesn't want to practice. You suspend him, you kick it out. Then he is forced to have this confrontation with the team, claiming mental health issues. I'm not going to question the validity of those mental health struggles at this moment. The bottom line is the 76ers accept it. Then he doesn't apparently want to see doctors. They fine him. Now he is seeing doctors. It all seemed predictable to me. What do you make of that whole situation? And how long do you think he's going to remain a 76er?
I guess from a logistical standpoint, I don't know what the process would be for getting rid of him, but I can tell you that if you are the 76ers, you don't want to have to deal with this any longer. I think out of the gate, you wanted to prove, hey, we're not in the wrong here. We'll let Ben Simmons make mistakes, lose money, prove that he's not a willing part of this franchise. But it has now gotten to that point where it is too much of the story and it is getting in the way of that team. I think they really just need to unload that baggage any way that they can, cut ties, and let him deal with what he's going to deal with. I mean, you talked about the mental health issues. If he does have those, I hope he's dealing with those, and I hope he figures it out. But it shouldn't be as a 76er. I think both parties want to separate, and when it gets to that point, just cut ties, end it as soon as possible. We've seen it with other troubled situations across all sports. As soon as you cut those ties, you can start building around the players that do want to be there and the players that can ultimately help you compete, because they still have a ton of talent on this team. I mean, Joel Embiid is still there. They have every bit of an opportunity to be a competitive team. But as long as Ben Simmons is there, that's going to be the storyline, and that's got to be frustrating for the players that still want to be there. So I think you really have to start thinking, how do we get rid of him in the soonest way possible and just move on.
Final two questions for you. So I touched on right before you came onto the show how Mike Krzyzewski now is engaging and they're embarking on this final season of his head coaching career at Duke. You're obviously a huge North Carolina fan. I'm curious, given that this is his last season, what your kind of emotions are to this being his final season. Again, obviously, selfishly as a North Carolina fan, you know, you're happy to see him go from that regard. You obviously Roy Williams just retired, but I'm just curious from your perspective as a North Carolina Tar Heel fan, what kind of Mike Krzyzewski has meant to you as a North Carolina fan, and how weird is it going to be when he's not there on the sidelines for Duke?
It's going to be really interesting. I think people are really underestimating what of a loss that will be for college basketball. There are still a lot of coaches that have been there for decades that are big names, but no one is as big as Coach K, and I think it will really reshape that program. I'm curious to see how it will evolve. To be honest, I think it is a good thing for Duke. I know you did mention before the show that he has adapted and he's brought in this new age of college basketball. I really don't think he's adjusted as well as everyone thought he was going to or thought he has. I think if you look at his teams, they've been very competitive in regular seasons, but you saw it the last 2 years, Duke really wasn't all that good and they weren't that competitive in the tournament. Now, granted, the last two tournaments were dominated by teams that had a lot of experienced players and it was tough to break into that. But in this age of one and done, it's very hard to find a class every year that's going to be very competitive. And I don't necessarily know if Coach K was built to coach that. I think whoever they ultimately bring in will probably be a lot more NBA talent friendly from the standpoint of coaching in college for that 1 year. Coach K obviously has great relationships with a lot of the players that he's put into the NBA. But at the end of the day, I think it is kind of a changing of the guard in college basketball with all these big recruits. It's time to move on. So as far as my emotions for this year goes, I will certainly watch the big games. But beyond that, I'll probably tune it out a little bit because we saw with the Champions Classic last night, everyone's going to be rolling out the red carpet. Everyone's going to have some sort of tribute. And a lot of it's going to get stale. A lot of it's going to get old. And you forget that college basketball has a relatively long shelf life. There's a long season ahead. I'm not sure I'm ready to tune into every game and watch every opposing fan base give him a tribute. I'll watch the big games, and I'm not saying I'm not going to follow Duke, but I don't know how many broadcasts I'm actually going to watch because I think I'm going to get my fair share of Coach K content.
Final couple seconds. Let me ask you, I don't know, did you get a chance to watch any of the Wisconsin basketball game last night?
I didn't catch the broadcast. It wasn't on in my region, but I certainly watched the highlights. I think it's a more balanced team than we expected at the end of last year, losing all of those seniors, losing all of those 3rd and 4-year starters. There's a lot of talent on this team, and I think they might surprise some people. I'm not necessarily.
Jonathan Davis looks good.
Jonathan Davis.
He's really kind of inserted himself as the main guy on that team.
Yeah, and I would say Chucky Hepburn is another name that you really need to keep an eye on. I think he's probably going to be the better scorer than Johnny Davis. I think Johnny Davis is the best facilitator on the team. He's an incredible athlete and a great defender. But Chucky Hepburn, I think he's the future of this program, and they've got some other guys that have played some minutes, and they've got some 3-4 star guys. I think Wisconsin's going to be better than people want to give them credit for right now.
The thing that I like is that we're starting out unranked because every time we start out ranked and we have these expectations, as you have notoriously reminded me of, we normally don't live up to those expectations. So I'd rather be pleasantly surprised by the team. And then, okay, final 2 seconds, and then I'm going to let you go. I want to give you a second. What do you think of your Dallas Cowboys? I should have asked you during the NFL segment.
If you had asked me a week ago, I would have said I'm over the moon. This week, I'm a little bit more cautiously optimistic. I think the question for the remainder of this year is not whether the Cowboys will win the division and go to the playoffs. I think that's almost a certainty. I'll knock on wood. The question is going to be how healthy is Dak? I know he was listed as healthy and ready to go for that Broncos game, but I think he looked a little questionable on that ankle. And I think with all of his other health issues, you wonder if he can stay healthy and remain at that potential Super Bowl level. I'm not saying the Cowboys are a Super Bowl team, but I think they have the talent around them. The defense is a lot better under Dan Quinn. If Dak can stay healthy and Zeke comes back from this injury healthy as well, I think the sky's the limit, but that is a big question mark, and it can change at any moment, as we've seen.
Sounds good. I like those words. Every time I see the Cowboys, I'm thinking Ben's probably somewhere hiding, somewhere cheering. I don't know, one of the in-between emotions. But no, Ben Cross, thank you so much for joining me. Make sure to check out Peacock, the sports platform. Ben Cross is curating and distributing all that sports content. So thank you, as always, Ben. Great to have you on.
Thanks. Great to be here. Thanks, Jonah.
All right. Ben Cross, great to have him on. It's been a little bit. I hadn't brought him on in a while, so I wanted to get him back on the show. Okay, final topic. My Malkins moments. Just a couple Malkins moments this week. It's not too elaborate, but there were some notable performances I did want to touch on for Steph Curry and the Warriors, who have gone off to this blistering hot start, 9-1 overall. Steph Curry dropped 50 points, 10 assists, 7 rebounds in the Warriors win over the Atlanta Hawks a couple nights ago, 127-113. He was 9 of 19 from 3, which, of course, that's what he does. 13 of 13 from the free throw line, over 50% shooting from the floor. And for Steph Curry, again, the Warriors all of a sudden have a 9-1 record. I will say that I did predict that they would make the Western Conference Finals. I can't claim that I said that they would win the NBA championship, because I did not, but I did think that they would be a they'd be a kind of transformed team this year round. I thought that this is a really good squad. Jordan Poole has elevated, James Wiseman, Kuminga, Klay Thompson's coming back, Steph Curry playing at, again, peak level right when they needed him to be. This was the 10th 50-point game of Steph Curry's career. He became the 3rd Warriors player in franchise history to put up a line of 50 points and 10 assists, joining Wilt Chamberlain, who did it in 1963 on February 13th. Rick Barry did it on February 23rd, 1974. Something about the month of February for those two guys. My birthday's in February, so not a surprise that it was a good month to putting up points. And at the age of 33, Steph Curry also passed Wilt Chamberlain for as the oldest player in NBA history to post a 50-point, 10-assist game. He now has 4 50-point games over the age of 32, or at the age of 32 or older, which is second most in the NBA, behind only Michael Jordan, who has done it 5 times. And finally, the Washington Capitals star Alex Ovechkin keeps just chugging along, posting up big-time numbers. He ties Brett Hull for 4th on the NHL's all-time scoring list, scoring his 741st goal in the 5-3 win over the Buffalo Sabres last night. Ovechkin just continues to chug along this milestone. At the age of 36, Ovechkin's on pace to pass third place Jaromir Jagr, who is at 766 goals. He's on pace to pass that number by the end of the year. And Gordie Howe has 801. And, of course, Wayne Gretzky, the all-time NHL leader, with 894 goals. This is the 17th season for Ovechkin. And already he is number 1 in the NHL in goals scored with 11, in shots attempted 104, and in shots on goal with 60. Just continues to defy the odds, having another sensational 17th season in the NHL. That's all the time that I got for today. Thank you so much for joining me right here on Morning Joe every single Monday and Wednesday morning, 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 10 to 11 Central, and 8 to 9 a.m. Pacific. Make sure to subscribe to my YouTube page, Morning Joe with Jonah Malkin. Follow me on Twitter at morning_Joe_ or at Jonah Malkin. Twitter, Instagram, JMalk97, TikTok, Jonah Malkin. And as always, have a lovely rest of your morning.